Riot Chapter 10. By lunch break of the first day of school, Brian had heard the word hero 23 times. He swore to himself that the next person who mentioned it, he'd grab by the collar and... How about a game of kickball? Kyle said, tossing the black and white soccer ball into the air and catching it in both hands. The sky was clear sapphire and breezy. You and I'll pick teams. Sounds good. Brian looked past the swarm of kids, jumping rope, chasing each other and practicing dance moves next to their tape players. Chelsea stood on the fringe of a cluster of girls near their school doors, the breeze playing with her high ponytail. Just a second, he said. He walked over to her. Want to play kickball? He asked. The other three girls stopped talking and huddled closer. Chelsea looked up at Brian. If she said no, he'd feel really stupid. She didn't answer right away. This isn't a joke, is it? She asked, sounding angrily. What? No. Just wondering if you wanted to play kickball. Chelsea looked down and then pulled her ponytail across her shoulder and began twisting a few strands of hair into a tight rope. First she began, they said that you said that Cam wasn't really worth saving because he was a... Brian knew exactly what she was going to say. The word suddenly seemed like a four-letter word. Brian lowered his voice and stepped closer, his back to the other girls. Because he's a rat, right? He studied her face. Chelsea glared at him. You said it then. I thought you were different. No, Brian said. He shook his head. No, I didn't say anything like that. It's not true. Chelsea looked hard at him. You mean you didn't say it? No. He drew an imaginary X over his chest, but as he did, he guiltily saw himself spilling tacks onto the street. He tried to ignore the picture. He could never tell Chelsea any of that. Chelsea waited. So you regret saving Cam? Of course not. Is the interrogation over? He asked. Can we play kickball now? Chelsea nodded. Sure. Brian picked one team. Kyle picked another. The teams were divided, 13-12, half boys, half girls. Chelsea was Brian's first pick. Brian's team sat in the grass. He watched Chelsea go up to kick. Green shirt billowing, she stood behind the white plastic plate, her legs bent, her body leaning slightly forward. Her eyes were fixed on the ball in the pitcher's hands. Anders Kent, the school's best kickball player, rolled the ball toward her. The game was a tie, 8-8, with only seconds left before the bell rang. Brian chewed on the white end of the bladed grass. He wanted to cheer on Chelsea, but he didn't want to be that conspicuous. Everyone would think he liked her. The ball rolled closer and closer to the base. Chelsea swung her leg back as if to smash it, and then the ball was over the white plate. She kicked it gently with the inside of her foot and raced toward first base. A bunt? Anders yelled, charging at the dead ball. A stupid bunt? I should have expected that from a rat. Rat. The word dug deeper under Brian's skin. Anders said the word with disgust and hate, as though Chelsea was something slimy. Anders stooped to pick up the ball. Brian's eyes burned. He didn't think. He just jumped up, and before Anders could even straighten, Brian was running full speed toward him. He skidded to a dead stop right in front of Anders. Anders' face went blank. What? Brian clenched his fist, slammed it into Anders' nose, and kept walking. Hey, Kyle called. Brian, what's going on? He walked beyond the playing field and then stopped, head pounding, knuckles sore, his arms drooping limply to his side, and the school bell rang. Brian turned. Anders was curled in a ball, moaning and holding his nose. Blood spurted between his fingers and onto his white shirt. Brian was stunned at what he had done. Was he going crazy? His breath came in shallow spurts. Kids flocked around Anders. They helped him to his feet and walked him toward the school, glancing over their shoulders. A distant plane droned. Kyle stood by his side. What was that all about? Brian cleared his throat. His mouth was very dry as dust. Just outside the school doors, he saw Chelsea, standing alone. Anders thinks he's such a hot shot. What's new? Kyle studied him, but why'd you have to smack him? You heard him, didn't you? Brian looked past Kyle. Mr. Ottenstad, the principal, was striding toward them in his striped shirt and a red tie. Whoa. You really like her, don't you? Kyle said, shaking his head, his back to the principal. Turn around, Brian said. I'm dead now. Kyle pivoted. Oh, hi, Mr. Ottenstad. The bell rang, boys, Ottenstad said, planting himself 3 feet from Brian. Inside. Brian started with Kyle toward the school, a deep breath of relief forming in his lungs. Brian, Ottenstad called, meet me in my office. Brian nodded. At the school doors, no one was waiting. Inside the principal's office, Mr. Ottenstad paced, his voice high and wiry. Brian, just what happened out there? Brian sat. He looked at his new Nikes, his new jeans. He shrugged. Brian Grant, Mr. Ottenstad ordered. Look at me, please. Brian made himself look up, imagining music for the scene. He tapped his right toe in staccato. He'd call it the Executioner's song. The first day of school, Brian, said the principal. The air was warm and heavy, probably stale from windows being closed all summer. I know, Brian said, matter-of-factly. What was he supposed to say? The first day of school, Mr. Ottenstad repeated, and you started with a fight. That's not what I've come to expect from you, Brian. Did something change over the summer? Yeah, this whole town has changed, Brian almost blurted out, but he didn't. Well, Mr. Ottenstad said, probing. He stopped pacing and tapped his red pen against the edge of the desk. What do you have to say to yourself? Brian's mind whirled. He knew that he had gotten angry because of what Anders had said to Chelsea, ridiculing her bunt kick just because her family worked for Baggett. But why did he have to flatten Anders? He didn't have a good answer. One moment he was siding with his father, the next he was on the other side, defending Chelsea. He didn't know if he had done right or not. Maybe he had inherited his father's hot hockey temper. Maybe it was as simple as that.